The letter from Texas. The summer of 1884 hung over Deadwood Gulch like a wet wool blanket, thick and suffocating. Even at 9:30 in the evening, the heat still radiated from the dusty main street, and the saloon doors of the Silver Dollars stood wide open, hoping to catch any breeze foolish enough to wander through the Dakota Territory. Samuel Sam Garrett sat at his usual table in the far corner, nursing his third whiskey of the night and watching the steady flow of miners, drifters, and gamblers who made the Silver Dollar their second home. At 52, Sam cut an imposing figure, tall and lean, with steel-gray hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hands, scarred from years of hard living, drummed an absent rhythm on the scarred wooden table. He'd been running the Silver Dollar for near on 8 years now, ever since he'd drifted into Deadwood with nothing but a horse, a gun, and enough money to buy the failing establishment from a drunk who'd lost it in a poker game. Sam had turned it into the most profitable saloon in town, but success hadn't filled the hollow spaces in his chest. Nothing could do that, nothing except maybe the bottle, and even that was losing its power. The batwing doors swung open with more force than usual, causing several patrons to look up from their cards and conversation. 3 figures stepped into the amber lamplight. 2 young men who couldn't have been more than 25, and between them an older woman dressed in traveling clothes that had seen better days. The dust on their boots and the weariness in their postures spoke of a long journey. Sam's attention was caught not by their appearance, but by something else, something in the way the taller of the 2 young men held himself, the set of his shoulders, the stubborn jut of his chin. It was familiar in a way that made Sam's stomach clench with an old, half-forgotten dread. The trio made their way through the crowded saloon, drawing curious stares. Strangers weren't uncommon in Deadwood, but there was something about these 3 that felt different, purposeful. They weren't here for gold or gambling or the usual reasons that brought folks to this particular corner of hell. They stopped at Sam's table. The taller young man, sandy-haired and sun-weathered with Sam's own gray eyes, reached into his vest pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and worn soft at the edges. He placed it carefully on the table between them. "Mr. Samuel Garrett." His voice carried the slow drawl of Texas, a sound that hit Sam like a physical blow. Sam's hand had frozen halfway to his glass. He stared at the letter, at the familiar handwriting that spelled out his name in fading ink. His throat felt suddenly dry as desert sand. "Depends who's asking," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. The young man straightened, and when he spoke again, his words cut through the saloon's noise like a blade through silk. "You left Mama in Texas and..." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 13 years of accusation and pain. Around them, the saloon continued its nightly revelry, but Sam felt as though the world had narrowed to just this table, these faces, this moment he'd been dreading for longer than he cared to admit. He forced himself to look up, to meet those familiar gray eyes. "And you would be?" "Thomas Garrett. This here's my brother James, and our Aunt Sarah." The young man's voice was steady, but Sam could see the tremor in his hands, the way his jaw worked as if he were chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "We've come a long way to find you." Sam's world tilted. Thomas, Jane. The last time he'd seen them, they'd been knee-high to a grasshopper chasing chickens around the yard of the little house outside of Austin. Thomas had been 7, James 5. Now they stood before him as men, and the years between felt like a canyon too wide to cross. "Sit," Sam said quietly, gesturing to the empty chairs around his table. "Sarah, you too, you look like you could use some rest." Sarah Palmer, his late wife's sister, settled into the chair across from him with a weary sigh. She'd aged more than the 13 years should have accounted for, her once brown hair now streaked with silver, lines etched deep around her eyes, but those eyes still held the same steel that had made her the most formidable woman in 3 counties. "Samuel." Her voice was crisp, formal. "No warmth, no forgiveness, Sarah." He nodded toward the bartender. "Charlie, bring us a bottle of the good stuff. And some coffee." When the drinks arrived, they sat in uncomfortable silence for a long moment. Finally, Thomas picked up the letter and held it out to Sam. "She wrote this the day before she died, made me promise to deliver it personal." Sam's hand shook as he took the envelope. The paper felt fragile, as if it might crumble at his touch. His name was written in Mary's careful script, Mary Catherine Garrett, the woman he'd married when he was 23 and she was 19, the woman he'd loved more than his own life, the woman he'd abandoned. "When?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "2 months ago, James spoke for the first time, his voice harder than his brother's, his face a mask of carefully controlled anger. Consumption took her slow. Sam closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 13 years crash down on him all at once. Mary was gone, the woman who'd loved him despite his flaws, who'd borne his children, who'd waited for him to come home from a war that had changed him in ways he couldn't explain. She was gone, and he'd never gotten the chance to read it. Thomas said, his voice softer now. With fingers that felt clumsy and thick, Sam opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Mary's handwriting was shaky. The sickness had been hard on her but still unmistakably hers. My dearest Sam, if you are reading this, then our boys have found you and I am gone. I pray that wherever you are, whatever you have made of your life, you have found some measure of peace. God knows you deserved it, even if you never believed so yourself. I will not lie and say I understood why you left. The man who came home from the war was not the same man who went away, and I knew you were hurting in ways I could not reach. But Sam, leaving was not the answer. Running away never is. The boys needed their father. I needed my husband. We could have helped you heal, could have faced whatever demons the war left you with. Instead, you chose to face them alone, and in doing so you left us to face our own demons without you. I want you to know that I forgave you long ago. Anger is a poison that hurts the one who carries it more than the one it's meant for. I chose to let it go for my sake and for the boys. They are good men, Sam. Thomas has your stubborn streak and your sense of honor. James has your quick mind and your way with words. They both have your eyes and I hope your heart beneath all that hurt and anger. Sarah has been a godsend, helping raise them when I could not. She never married, said she had her hands full with us. She has every right to be angry with you, but she loved me enough to make this journey. I do not write this letter to make you feel guilty, though I suspect you will anyway. That was always your way, to carry more guilt than any one man ought to. I write it because I want you to know that despite everything, you were loved, you are loved, and forgiveness is possible, if you will allow it. The boys do not understand why you left. How could they? They were children, and children see the world in simple terms. Fathers should stay. Families should be together. Perhaps you can help them understand. Perhaps you can help yourself understand. I hope you will try. Sam, I hope you will let them know the man I fell in love with. The man who was kind and gentle and strong in all the ways that mattered. He is still there, I believe. He has to be. All my love, always, Mary. There is something else they need to know. Something I could never bring myself to tell them. Sarah knows. I leave it to your judgment whether they should know the truth. Sam read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it on the table. When he looked up, he found 3 pairs of eyes watching him intently. She was a remarkable woman, he said finally, his voice thick with unshed tears. Too good for the likes of me. Then why? Thomas leaned forward, his composure finally cracking. Why did you leave us? We were your family, we loved you. Sam reached for his whiskey glass, then thought better of it. This conversation deserved a clear head, even if it was 13 years too late. The war, he said simply. It changed things, changed me. Lots of men came back from the war, James said coldly. Most of them didn't abandon their families. James, Sarah spoke quietly, but there was warning in her tone. No, Aunt Sarah, I want to know why our mother had to work herself to death taking in laundry and mending to keep food on our table. I want to know why she cried herself to sleep most nights for the first 2 years after he left. I want to know why we had to grow up without a father. The accusations hit Sam like physical blows, each one deserved, each one adding to the weight of guilt he'd carried for 13 years. But beneath the guilt was something else, a familiar darkness that had driven him away in the first place. You want the truth? Sam's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly in the suddenly hushed space around their table. The truth is that I killed children in that war, Confederate boys who weren't any older than you are now. I killed them because they were wearing gray instead of blue, because some politician told me it was the right thing to do. He paused, gathering himself. I came home with their faces burned into my memory. I couldn't sleep without seeing them. I couldn't look at you boys without wondering if someday someone would send you off to kill other mothers' children. I couldn't be around innocence anymore. It felt like a lie. Thomas and James exchanged glances, some of the anger fading from their face. So you left, Thomas said. It wasn't a question. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed some time to sort myself out. I headed west, figured the open country might help clear my head. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back. How do you explain to your wife and children that you're not the man they thought you were? How do you tell them that every time you look at them, you see the faces of the boys you killed? You could have tried, James said, but his voice had lost its hard edge. Yes, Sam agreed quietly. I could have tried, should have tried. Your mother was right about that. But I was a coward, and cowards run. Sarah spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. There's more to the story, Samuel, things the boys don't know. Sam looked at her sharply. Sarah, they have a right to know. Mary thought so too, or she wouldn't have mentioned it in the letter. Know what? Thomas looked between them, confusion and growing concern on his face. Sarah reached into her reticule and pulled out another envelope, this one newer than the first. After your father left, your mother discovered she was carrying another child. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward until they touched everything. Another child. James's voice was barely audible. A daughter, Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on Sam's face. Mary named her Catherine, after her grandmother. She's 12 years old now. Sam felt the breath leave his body as if he'd been punched. A daughter. Another child he'd abandoned before she was even born. Where? He started, then had to clear his throat. Where is she? With Mary's cousin in Houston. She's been there since Mary got too sick to care for her properly. A sweet girl, bright as a penny. She has your eyes too. Thomas was staring at Sarah in shock. You mean we have a sister? All this time we've had a sister, and nobody told us? Mary made me promise, Sarah said defensively. She said if you boys ever found your father, then Catherine would need to know about him too. But until then she thought it would be easier for everyone if the girl believed her father was dead. Easier for who? James demanded, his anger returning full force. For him? He pointed at he gets to disappear and pretend we don't exist, while we grow up thinking we're not good enough to keep our own father around. Sam flinched at the accusation, recognizing the truth in it. You were good enough, he said quietly. You were everything. That was the problem. That doesn't make sense, Thomas said, frustration clear in his voice. Sam rubbed his face with both hands, feeling every one of his 52 years. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? You ever see a man who's been bit by a mad dog? He asked finally. The disease makes him afraid of water, even though water is what he needs most. That's what the war did to me. It made me afraid of the thing I needed most, my family. Made me afraid I'd contaminate you somehow, pass on whatever darkness had gotten into me. So you left us to deal with the consequences alone, James said. Yes, the simple admission hung between them, and I've regretted it every day since. The saloon noise continued around them, but their table remained an island of tense silence. Finally Thomas spoke. Mama never remarried. Did you know that? Aunt Sarah brought her suitors from time to time, good men who would have taken care of her and us, but she always said she was still married in the eyes of God. The words were like knives, each one finding its mark. Sam closed his eyes, remembering Mary as she'd been when he left. Beautiful, loving, faith strong enough for both of them. She deserved better, he whispered. Yes, she did, Sarah said sharply, but she chose to believe in the man she married, even when he couldn't believe in himself. What do you want from me? Sam asked, opening his eyes to look at each of them in turn. I can't undo what I did, can't bring her back or give you the father you needed. The damage is done. We want you to come back, Thomas said simply. Catherine needs to know her father, and maybe we need to know him too. Sam stared at him. Back to Texas. Mary left the house to the boys, Sarah explained, and there's Catherine to consider. She's going to need family, especially now that Mary's gone. I don't know anything about raising a 12-year-old girl, Sam protested. Then learn, James said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice held something other than anger. We'll all learn together. Isn't that what families do? Sam looked around the saloon that had been his world for 8 years. The silver dollar was profitable, yes, but it was also a way of hiding, of avoiding the kind of connections that required courage. The thought of returning to Texas, of facing the life he'd abandoned, terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. But the thought of continuing to hide, of leaving his daughter to grow up without a father the way his sons had, terrified him more. She might not want to know me, he said quietly. Catherine, she's gotten along without me for 12 years. Children need their fathers, Thomas, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones, Sarah added, her voice softer than it had been all evening. Mary always said that healing happens in families, not in isolation. Sam picked up the letter from Mary and read it again, focusing on the words about forgiveness and love. When he looked up, he found 3 faces watching him with a mixture of hope and weariness. "I'm not the same man who left Texas," he warned them. "The war, the years since, they've changed me. I might not be the father you remember or the one Catherine needs." "People can change back," Thomas said. "People can heal. It won't be easy," Sam continued. "I've got debts here, business to settle, and the journey back, it's not exactly a pleasure trip." "We didn't come all this way to go back alone," James said firmly. Sam stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I need some air. It's a lot to take in." He made his way through the crowded saloon to the Batwing doors, stepping out into the dusty street. The night air was finally beginning to cool, and overhead stars blazed in the clear Dakota sky. Behind him, he could hear the low murmur of conversation as his sons and Sarah talked among themselves. A daughter, Catherine, 12 years old, with his eyes and Mary's everything else, probably. A girl who'd grown up believing her father was dead, which wasn't far from the truth, he supposed. The man who'd left Texas in 1871 might as well have died. The question was whether enough of him remained to be worth resurrecting. He thought about Mary dying of consumption in a charity ward while he'd been serving whiskey to miners and gamblers. Had she thought of him at the end? Had she wondered if he'd ever come home? "Mama always said you were the bravest man she knew." Sam turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the saloon's lamplight. "Your mama was kind, but she was wrong about that." Thomas stepped out into the street, coming to stand beside him. "Was she? You fought in a war, came west alone, with nothing but a horse and a dream, built a successful business in one of the toughest towns in the territory. That sounds pretty brave to me." "Running away isn't brave." "No," Thomas agreed, "but coming back is." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of a piano from another saloon down the street. "What's she like?" Sam asked finally. "Catherine." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile Sam had seen from him all evening. "Stubborn as a mule, smart as a looks just like Mama, except for the eyes. Those are definitely yours. She loves books and horses and getting into trouble. James taught her to read when she was 4, and she's been unstoppable ever since." "James taught her. We both helped raise her, especially after Mama got sick." "She's not just our sister. She's kind of like our daughter too in a way, but she needs her real father now, needs to know where she comes from." Sam felt a stab of guilt at the thought of his sons taking on responsibilities that should have been his. "You boys had to grow up too fast." "Maybe, but it made us stronger, made us appreciate what we had instead of taking it for granted." The saloon doors swung open again, and James emerged, followed by Sarah. "We've been talking," James announced without preamble. "If you're serious about coming back, we think we should start planning. Aunt Sarah needs to get back to Catherine, and we can't afford to stay here much longer." Sam looked at the 3 of them, his family, such as it was, and felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't exactly hope, not yet, but it was close. "What about the silver dollar?" he asked. "I can't just walk away from it, can't you?" Sarah challenged. "You walked away from everything else. This is different. I've got employees' obligations." "Sell it," Thomas said simply, "or hire someone to run it for you." "Money's not everything, Papa." The word hit Sam like a physical blow. Papa. He hadn't heard it in 13 years, and it sounded strange coming from this grown man who barely knew him. "I'm not sure I remember how to be a father," he admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together," James said. "All of us." Sam looked up at the stars again, thinking about choices and consequences, about the weight of the past, and the possibility of redemption. Mary was gone, that door had closed forever. But Catherine was alive, waiting in Houston, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be the father she needed. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll come back." The relief on their faces was almost painful to see. How long had they been carrying this burden, this need to find him and bring him home? "But I have conditions," he continued. "I need time to settle my affairs here, and when we get to Texas, we take things slow with Catherine. She doesn't know me from Adam, and I won't have her forced into accepting me if she's not ready." "Agreed," Sarah said immediately. "And I want to visit Mary's grave, before we collect Catherine. I need to say goodbye properly." Thomas nodded. "She's buried in the cemetery outside Austin. There's a headstone. We made sure of that." "Good." Sam took a deep breath, feeling as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. "I can be ready to travel in a week. Will that work?" "That'll work fine," James said, and for the first time, he smiled at his father. They made their way back inside the saloon,
and Sam found himself seeing it with new eyes. The silver dollar had been his refuge for 8 years, a place to hide from the past and avoid the future. But it wasn't home. It had never been home. Home was a 12-year-old girl in Houston who didn't know her father was alive. Home was the possibility of redemption, of becoming the man Mary had believed he could be. Home was scary as hell, but maybe that was the point. "Charlie," Sam called to his bartender, "come here, I've got a proposition for you." As he began to explain the situation to his startled employee, Sam felt his sons and Sarah watching him, with something that might have been pride. It was a start, not forgiveness maybe, but a beginning. Outside, the Dakota night stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and somewhere far to the south, Texas waited. Texas, and a daughter who needed her father to finally come home. The journey back would be long and difficult, filled with conversations that should have happened 13 years ago, and explanations that might never be enough. But for the first time since he'd ridden away from Austin in 1871, Sam Garrett felt like he was heading in the right direction. Home. After all these years, he was finally going home.